All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This webinar series has been convened by the Critical Zone Network, CZN, Early Career Network, with partnership with the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. This is the second series of a number of series that the CZN Early Career Network has planned, all with the goal of enhancing collaboration and synthesis across CZ observatories and watershed sites. Welcome to the second week of this CUAHSI Cyberseminar series, Tools for Integrating and Synthesizing Data from CZOs and Watershed Sites. This is a 6-part series that will continue each week at this time until December 2nd, with a brief break in November for Thanksgiving. My name is Julia Masterman, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for CUAHSI. CUAHSI is the consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science, and our mission is to advance water science by strengthening interdisciplinary collaboration, providing critical infrastructure through our data services, and promoting education in water science at all levels, in part through programs like the Cyberseminar series. CUAHSI also serves as the national coordinating hub for the Critical Zone Collaborative Network, or CZCN, and we're thankful to the members of the CZNet team for their contributions to this series. Other goings on at CUAHSI with the CZNet team. The CZNet team is hosting another webinar series that's going on right now on data management. This series will consist of bi-weekly mini workshops with presentations from the CZ Hub team and opportunities to ask questions, as well as some data help sessions. The series is a great opportunity for CZNet data managers, students, or investigators to connect, ask questions, and get one-on-one help from members of the CZ Hub team. I'll put more information in a link in the chat in a moment, but sessions are being held every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. If you're interested, check out that link in just a moment. I would encourage you to reach out to me, visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, or join our community Slack channel to learn more about CUAHSI more broadly or to get involved. A few logistical things as we get started here. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the CUAHSI YouTube channel later this afternoon. Secondly, we ask that they use the Q&A functionality to submit questions to our panelists. And finally, we expect that all involved with CUAHSI Cyberseminars to promote and maintain a professional, considerate, respectful, and collaborative virtual environment. Thank you again for joining us, and to the CZN Early Career Network for putting together this lineup of presentations and fantastic speakers. And thank you to all of our speakers for taking the time to join us today. Today's session is Global Experiments in Synthesis. And with that, I'll pass the mic to CZN Early Career Network Steering Committee member, Bhavna Arora. Bhavna?
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, hi, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Bhavna Arora. I'm a research scientist at Berkeley Lab, and very excited to be co-hosting this with my Early Career Network of Networks group. And also in coordination with the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. So, you know, what we're trying to do here is move towards synthesis and integration across different critical zone observatories and watershed sites. And so this particular panel is really close to my heart to think about what are the lessons learned from these global experiments. What are the best practices that we need and we can ensure to do better coordination among these sites? And one last announcement before I pass it to Adam. We do have an early career workshop at AGU to be scheduled for December 9th. And we still have some spots left for that. CUAHSI has been kind in providing some opportunities for students and early career members to register. So we'll post that link in the chat if you're interested. So with that, thank you again for a really great group of panelists that we have today. And Adam, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Bhavna. And hi, everybody. I'm Adam Wymore at the University of New Hampshire, and welcome and thank you very much for attending today's webinar on global experiments in synthesis. Synthesis science is definitely a burgeoning field, and this is due to the success of many long-term ecological and hydrological observatories. And it was with this recognition in mind that we were motivated to develop today's webinar. So we have a great series of talks lined up today, and we provided the speakers with a series of prompts to help organize their presentations. And I wanted to share those here before we started. And these prompts were, what scales, spatially and temporally, does your synthesis effort uniquely allow you to examine? What hypotheses can you specifically or uniquely test for your synthesis effort? What are some of the challenges you have encountered during data synthesis, harmonization, and analysis? And are your solutions transferable to other synthesis efforts? And lastly, how are you sharing your data and outputs? So hopefully there's some themes of continuity among the talks, and looking forward to all of them. And with that, I will pass to my colleague, Jannis, who will present each of the talks and speakers. Thank you.
Hi together, my name is Jannis Groh and I'm from the Forschungszentrum Jülich in Germany. And I welcome our first speaker today, which is Matt Ross. He is an assistant professor at the Colorado State University. Matt, please, you have the floor.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for this invitation. I'm really excited to share our project. I'll be talking about MacroSheds, which is an NSF funded project for funded in the macro systems program. And the goal of this project is to essentially integrate all of the bespoke, custom, local watershed ecosystem studies that have been run through the LTR network, the CZO network, NEON network, and the US Forest Service into a single data portal for exploration of continental scale watershed behavior, with the idea of thinking about watershed traits as dominant controls of some of the ideas of interest, like nutrient cycling and chemical weathering and other aspects that you can explore sort of at a large scale. We're 2 years into this project, and we has, as you can see from this website, we have a data portal that sort of updates, I don't know, roughly monthly with new data sets that we're acquiring. We have all of the LTR, all of the CZO, and many of the US Forest Service data sets in here, along with the NEON data sets that have been published. And these are all sort of integrated and harmonized. And I'm just going to sort of show you some of the functionality of this website, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the prompts that Adam mentioned once I pulled them back up so I can see them. So first, you can sort of go to macrosheds.org. And I would also like to thank CUAHSI. They have built capacity for us to host Shiny apps. So you can contact me later if you want to host your own Shiny apps. But you can sort of go to our website, take a site tour, and you can start to walk through the design of the website. So we have two panels, basically time series or site comparisons, and you can change different domains and you can add different watershed sites. So this requires you knowing a little bit about these areas. I'm just going to sort of close that after this part. We have concentration, flux, and volume weighted concentration in the portal. You can see the sites on a map. So right now we have Hubbard Brook. So for those of you that don't know, that's in New Hampshire up here. And so you can sort of see the sites as you zoom in here, and you can see the different sites. And then you could add, this is a domain that we have here, and we could add watershed. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. We have Hubbard Brook here, and watershed 6 is what's showing the acid rain deposition of sulfate in the sort of early 80s, and then the continued decline with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Air Act amendments. And we can look at that at other watersheds as well. So we can look at watershed 1, and then we can click update plots, and then you'll add another data set. There we go. And so this is sort of just some of the functionality of the website. And of course, we have two goals with this project. One is to integrate the data, and the other is to democratize the data for larger communities to interact with these large, complex, integrated data sets. And so you can sort of have Hubbard Brook here, and then we could also just go ahead and add something like H.J. Andrews if we wanted, or Furno. And then you can add sites across domains. And I'm doing this live, so I don't actually even know sort of everything about this data, so they might not have sulfate. Yeah, and so now you can see the comparison to Furno in purple here. So this is sort of the functionality of the website, and our spatial scale ambitions are sort of in the proposal is continental US, but we are already integrating easy to integrate global data sets as well. We are grabbing the unique feature of this is that we're grabbing all the data. So some of these sites we have almost 60 years of data. We are hoping to test hypotheses like controls of watershed traits. So something like gross primary production, is that a dominant control on weathering rates of something like calcium and carbonate bedrocks? And we're hoping to do that across a lot of watershed sites, whereas most of the history of watershed ecosystem studies, it was really focused at one site at a time. we've encountered a lot of challenges, as you might expect, with harmonizing our data. I'll just highlight one that I'm really excited about that we just got some funding to work on. But the early stages of the NEON data set, they've been collecting lots and lots of chemistry data, but their discharge data is sort of mixed in terms of its reliability. Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's missing. And so we're working on using some machine learning techniques to learn from other large data sets like CAMELS, which has a bunch of USGS gauges, and our own data to train a hydrologic model that can fill in gaps of data. So this is just showing Walker Branch, where there's some discharge data from NEON, and this is sort of the observation in blue. This is our original prediction in orange, and then after you fine tune on the Walker Branch data set, we actually get a really high Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency of 0.8. And this is a method that we're really hoping to share with the community to produce discharge estimates when you don't necessarily have great local discharge estimates because your sensor fell out of the stream or there was a flood or whatever. And we have a lot of methods. All of our data streaming, so how we grab the data from LTR and CZO networks, is really robust, and all of that is public right now. We're developing this in a fully open framework, so anyone can use our data sets and our code, and that's all in our GitHub, just github.com/macrosets. We're about to have our first data release paper for this data set, so we're going to be submitting that soon. But all of our data processing and portal scripts are all publicly available, and we try to share them as rapidly as possible, with the idea that, you know, when people use them, we hope they cite all of us. And we're actually working through some complex processes. Another thing is, like, when you cite an aggregation effort like Macrosheds, we also want you to cite Hubbard Brook because they generated the data, or H.C. Andrews because they really generated the data, or the CZO network. And so we're working on building out some supplementary data so that if you cite Macrosheds, there's an easy way for you to cite all the sub-data data sets that we're integrating. So we're thinking kind of hard how to make this fair and how to highlight the long-term efforts of the Forest Service, CZO, and LTR people who have done this. I think I am out of time, but hopefully you can go to macrosheds.org and play around a little bit more for yourself.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was great. So our next speaker will be, let me see, Kathi Jankowski, who is a research ecologist affiliated with the US Geological Survey. Kathi, please go on.
You're
Okay,
muted.
there we go. Okay, can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, that was a really impressive portal that you showed, Matt. Thanks so much for that. We do not have one like that, so that is really cool. But so today I am going to talk about a synthesis working group effort that is through the LTER Research Network, funded by the National Science Foundation. We have a lot of working group members, all from the different US LTERs, as well as myself from the USGS, and then a few other locations. And our focus is really on understanding and investigating the controls of river silica exports across multiple biomes, so from the tropics to the poles. And the motivation really behind this is that river silica is the greatest source of silica to the oceans on an annual basis. And we know it's really important for ocean primary productivity and carbon cycling, but also really influential in terms of what's happening in the rivers themselves, river productivity, as well as sort of food web dynamics. But it's a much less studied element relative to other important nutrients like nitrogen or phosphorus, and likely pretty sensitive to a lot of the climate-related shifts that we're seeing in hydrology and temperature. I followed pretty closely to these prompts in putting this together. So in thinking about the hypotheses that we are specifically able to test through our synthesis efforts, we really propose to examine three particular hypotheses. And what I'm mostly going to focus on today is the third one, but the first two are really kind of understanding what's happening on the landscape what is the role of terrestrial vegetation in controlling seasonality and exports of river silica across biomes? And then how does river trophic state influence those exports to the ocean? And then what we've really been focusing on to begin with is looking at long-term change in concentration, flux, and seasonality of silica in rivers over the last several decades. And this is really because there's very little known about long-term change in river silica, and especially what the drivers of that are. So we thought we had a unique data set to be able to look at that long-term change. In terms of scales we're working at, we are global with a primary focus on North America as a result of being funded by the LTER network. We do one site in Brazil and then several Arctic rivers from Russia and Canada and the Yukon River in Alaska. We also are working with data from the Antarctic from the McMurdo LTER site. And so in total, we have 430 sites and with 62 of those with 15 to 20 years of data at least. These cross several biomes from the dry valleys in McMurdo all the way to the rainforests of Puerto Rico. So quite a range of scales. Large range in river sizes and hydrologic regimes. So we're from everywhere from 5 cubic feet per second to 500,000 with the Mississippi River where I work. And then a lot of variation in the time periods. So just thinking this is from, we have most sites that are sort of in the recent 20 to 25 years, but then some like Hubbard Brook that go back into the 1960s as well. So a range in our ability to say something. In terms of challenges in data harmonization, I think just a lot of the same challenges that Matt dealt with and they have overcome as well. In terms of different sampling regimes, how to handle, when we're sampling at different times of year, the missing data and need for interpolation, both, across, you get large data gaps in some of the sites, but not all. Changing sampling methods through time is particularly challenging for working with long-term data. And then finding watershed data in areas where spatial data don't exist or aren't easily accessible for us. So in our case for thinking about long-term change, we decided to use a more flexible modeling approach, thinking of the weighted regressions on time, discharge, and season model that the USGS put together. And the value of that for our approach was that we can integrate these different sampling regimes that aren't necessarily all equal in time because we're predicting concentrations and daily flux from daily discharge, which we had much more frequently throughout our data set. So we can then pull out subsets of data and summarize, by different seasons or different periods of time across our different sites in ways that are more uniform. And we are also from this are able to look at trends in flow normalized concentrations through time, which help us understand better how concentrations or changes in the landscape are influencing what we're seeing in the river independently of changes in discharge. And so in terms of synthesizing that data, some of our results thus far, just showing the percent change in flux across all these 62 sites that represent 11 different LTERs. And so we're seeing a wide range of change through time across these sites with some predictable shifts occurring at our Alpine and Arctic sites, as shown at that really large percent change on the right there, and then some unexpected change in declines that we're seeing in these large Arctic rivers, and then at several of our Antarctic sites, we've seen declines through time. So some consistency, but then a lot of variation. For example, those pink bars are the Upper Mississippi River where I work, and just a lot of variability happening over time in this one watershed. So I'm trying to understand what some of the drivers of that variation is. So that's kind of where we are now in terms of our synthesis, like trying to understand the drivers of this variability and trends across site. We don't have the same explanatory data everywhere. And so that makes it challenging in making sort of uniform statements. and vastly different sites over different time scales. How do we describe these global patterns in ways that are still interesting and meaningful? So thus far, we're moving into sort of understanding when and how those changes are taking place. So thinking about seasonality, we can pull out, are these changes occurring during the winter? Are they occurring in the shoulder seasons? And then describing sort of what the sort of concentration discharge patterns are through time. So, and yet our data are not available yet in a fancy portal, but we do have all our scripts on GitHub and some links to the data there, and all of it will be made available either through the USGS Science Base or EDI. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathi, for this very nice insights on this project. So our third speaker today will be Liang Chang. She's a PhD student from the University of California, Berkeley. Please, Liang, you have the floor.
All right, can everyone see my screen? Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here to give the presentation. Today, I would like to introduce you the data synthesis project that our lab have been working on. And the data product, we named it the Chosen Dataset, which is short for Comprehensive Hydrologic Observatory Sensor Network. It's a database of hydrologic variables from 30 study areas across the United States. Okay. So Chosen Dataset is not original data collections. It is a compilation of publicly available data from multiple intensively monitored watersheds. And the original data we used for synthesis are from the CZO and later networks, and also 3 university field stations. And the aim of the Chosen Dataset is to support comparative hydrological studies. We know that CZO and later networks have been doing a great job in calling for publicly available data. However, the data from the websites do have inconsistent data formats, units, and may be processed in different ways. So this will create a lot of challenges for researchers to directly use this data, especially the data from multiple watersheds for comparative analysis. So our project aims to remove those consistencies across watersheds and make the data more convenient for researchers to use. And we recognize that there are many hydrological studies benefit from hydrologic time series relevant to water balance partitioning. So besides including basic variables like discharge, air temperature, and precipitation data, we're also very interested in collecting data such as soil moisture, snow depths, and vapor pressure. So usually the updating and expanding takes a lot of time and efforts to do for the existing data sets. To solve this problem, we generate a data pipeline that can process and update the data easily. So it will be really handy to use the current pipeline to process data from a new watershed and use the processed data to replenish the current data set. Yeah, so currently in the Chosen Dataset, we have included data from 30 intensively monitored watersheds, and there are in total 13 variables that we are collecting. Because there are differences in the data availability from different sites, the number of variables and the record lengths also vary from site to site. Okay, so this heat map is showing the variables, watersheds, and their record lengths. So here is the workflow that we have followed to clean and process the data. So after we have downloaded the data from the websites, we do a quality control and remove any errors in the data that might be caused by typos or malfunctions of measuring instruments. And then we standardize the name of the data columns. So Chosen Dataset right now provides data on a daily temperature scale. So for data collected on a sub-daily scale, we have aggregated the data to a daily scale. And after that, we implemented 3 data filling methods to fill the gaps. So first, for small gaps, we just use a linear interpolation to fill the gaps. And for longer gaps, we use spatial regression and temporal regression. And finally, the data, the process data were written into the nice CDF files. So we implemented this workflow with a set of Jupyter notebooks as a pipeline on data from each study area. All right. Yeah. So the data products and the data processing are now available on the Zenodo and GitLab websites. So in the GitLab, there's also an interactive Jupyter notebook as tutorials for like in terms of how to use the data pipeline, particularly the data filling methods part. So which this pipeline could be also reused by other researchers in the hydrologic field. Okay. Yeah, so here is like one of the applications of the chosen data set from our lab, which is analyzing the extreme events in the magnitudes and frequency of hydroclimatic time series. And the results have shown that there are extreme events trend hotspots in Southeast, Northeast, Pacific Northwest, and Alaska. And also we looked into how the high flow and low flow extremes relate with other hydrologic processes. And we have found that the low flow extremes are commonly correlated with evapotranspiration trends. And besides the analysis of the trends of extreme events, we believe that there are more questions could potentially be answered with the chosen data set. All right. We're hoping that new data from intensively monitored watersheds could be continually contribute to the chosen data set to develop it and replenish it. Yeah. And we hope that the chosen data set will be a useful resources for future hydrological studies. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you very much, Liang. That is a very wonderful name for your project, The Chosen.
Thank you.
And very nice data. Our next speaker today is Daniele Penna. He is an associate professor at the University of Florence. Please continue with your presentation, Daniele.
Thank you very much, Jannis, and hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. Rather than focusing on tools here, I try to focus my talk about approaches. And the three approaches that I try to build my research on are these three pillars: intercomparison exercises, interdisciplinary approach, and multi-scale analysis. So I'm trying to go over this through these three pillars. And we started, or the hydrological community started to talk about the need to synthesize data already more than 15 years ago. And these famous authors actually underlined the need to go across processes, places, scales, to try to link measurement, analysis, and models, and even partners with people. And it's interesting that after more than 15 years, we are still talking about this. I think this is really a way to go, especially now when we have a large development of study sites and new models. And the first approach that I tend to follow in my research is catchment or critical zone observatory intercomparisons. There are excellent examples in the literature about comparisons of data from two catchments or some catchments or even multiple catchments. And I think that this is really important because it allows us to go beyond our simple background, our simple garden, let's say, backyard, and try to find the similarities and dissimilarities that actually drive processes in different environments. And here, in this way, we can really understand what are the main processes governing different environments. And in the Italian case, we were able to develop an Italian network of critical zone observatories. Thank you to the funding of the Italian Minister of Education and Research. This involves at the moment 6 sites having different physiographic characteristics and across a climatic gradient in Italy. And here we're trying to address questions related to the movement of water fluxes between the soil, the plants, and the atmosphere in forested or agricultural sites. In this case, we're using isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen as a diagnostic tool to better understand these fluxes. The second pillar, I think it's really a key for several of us, is the interdisciplinary approach. I think that all of us feel more comfortable in working with people who have their the same expertise, but I think it's really useful to try to work with people who know different things compared to me. And this is an example from a short commentary written by with a colleague, ecophysiologist, and we simply put this sketch stressing that one single element of the landscape can be seen differently according to the perspective. And we really need, in my opinion, to merge these different perspectives in order to get a more holistic comprehension of the different physical and biological processes governing landscapes. In this case, I'm talking about ecophysiology, but of course there are several complementary disciplines and expertise that I'm actually trying to include in my research, spanning from geophysics analysis and geological analysis to geomorphologist analysis and plant physiology, of course, ecology, and also working with people expert in hydraulics and pedology. And talking about interdisciplinary, I think that it's worth mentioning this recent initiative. It's a European-funded cost action. Cost actions are large European projects that mainly aims to put together researchers and stakeholders. And WATSON stands for water isotopes in the critical zone, from groundwater recharge to plant transpiration. It's a network of more than 150 people coming from 38 different European countries. And we are trying to address these challenges related to groundwater recharge, vegetation water take and transpiration patterns, and catchment scale residence and travel time. And if you have a spare minute, go and look our website, because there are opportunities for networking interaction also from people who are based outside Europe in terms of international observatory. And also in this kind of initiative, we're making efforts to share a data set and make larger data sets. And the third pillar I'm trying to follow is moving across different spatial scales, not only in terms of research from plot and hislop and catchment scale, but also in corresponding scales, like in forest environments, from the tree to the forest stand and to the foreign landscape. And this is an example of the small research catchment that my research group at the University of Florence is running. And here in this research catchment in Tuscany, we are trying to work both at the tree scale, at the individual tree scale, and at the hislop scale, and up to the catchment scale at different sections along the stream, so at different spatial scales, both with a experimental approach and a modeling approach. So, in conclusion, I think the three important elements that should be taken into account to really try to integrate and synthesize data from catchments and critical zone observatories are intercomparison exercises, networking and collaboration, having an interdisciplinary approach, and multi-scale analysis. I think that's all, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Daniele, for that very nice insights from your ongoing projects, and also I very much like that that catchments with a lot of experimental stuff is going on. That's very nice to see that. Our final speaker today is Cristy Portales Reyes. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Georgia. Cristy, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm very excited to share with you about our LTR transitions working group. We are hosted at NC's, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, and we are funded by the Long-Term Ecological Research Network Office. We are a little more biased towards plant ecology, but we also think a lot about the same topics about data management and access, as well as trying to consolidate data sources that are perhaps disparate in both origin and format. So our main questions have to do with how will plant communities respond to multiple perturbations? We know that climate is changing, and there are things like rising CO2 or increased nutrient inputs to ecosystem, changes to fire regime, but they're not usually happening just one thing at a time. At the same time, we know that there is an increase in climate variability. So our big question is, when you have all of these things happening at once, will this make it more likely to have plant communities that perhaps will experience more difficult to reverse compositional shifts or ecosystem transitions? And what we are trying to do is to really take advantage of all the manipulative experiments that exist within the LTER network and beyond, where we have actually manipulated many of these perturbations, and where we are finally, with long enough time series, that we can capture some of that variability. It's also important to say that there are several experiments that are explicitly manipulating variability. So those are data sources that we're also very excited about. We have a very diverse team of collaborators. It's a group of 16 people, and we all come from different career stages, backgrounds, and also have different expertise. So we have people who are mathematicians or theoretical ecologists. We have community ecologists, ecosystem ecologists, and half of us are ecologists who are still in training. So half of us are postdocs or graduate students. The majority of us are early career. So one thing that I really want to emphasize during the talk is to keep in mind that all of us have our own jobs and our own research programs, and doing synthesis is something that we do often on top of all that we are supposed to do in our regular activities. So one thing that we really try to be very intentional on, Annie Chung, my postdoc advisor, and I are leading this group. And we try to be very intentional to make the experience exciting and also useful to everyone. So even before we had a meeting, we try to organize our ideas. We had the ideas from the proposal and the questions that we wanted to ask, but opened it up to the rest of the participants to say what other questions they might be interested in exploring with the data sets that we were working to harmonize and to work with. And then based on that, we had people express interest in what they would be most excited to do. And of course, there were questions that people were super excited to tackle right away, but also things that people were just not interested in. So that makes it easier for us to gauge interest, but also make sure that everyone's excited to do this. And from that exercise, we started our first meeting with 4 sort of core areas or topics that our participants were interested in pursuing. So there are subgroups within our group that are starting to work on the effects of perturbations on community variability, so looking at those manipulative experiments. Other people are more focused on community variability and climate variability and the interplay of that. There's another group of us that are thinking about the theory of ecosystem transitions and trying to really gather evidence for our ecosystem transition, something we can even detect. And then there's other people in the group that are thinking more about taxa-specific responses. So from that, we had the joy and challenge of starting this working group in the last year. So our first meeting was virtual, which is not ideal necessarily. Many of us had not met each other before, but we try to be really intentional about how we organized our time and try to make sure that we had enough networking opportunities for the big group to interact, but also smaller sessions where we perhaps work with smaller groups. This particularly thinking about those of us who are earlier in our career. It's sometimes intimidating to speak up if there might be someone who you don't know, and perhaps is someone who's a bit more established in your mind. So from that, some of the activities that we did were using online co-working tools like Mural. So to really hone in what products we were excited to do, we didn't think that virtually working, we would be able to do what we usually do at an NC's working group of sitting next to each other and coding. It didn't seem like in a 2-hour block we would get much done. So instead, we try to focus on really honing in what we wanted to do with our time. So we had exercises like this one, where in small groups we would think about what questions specifically we wanted to ask, what data sets we would need. And this really helps whoever is the lead of each paper or of each product to think about what the data package we need to build for each group. And also what additional data sets we might need to gather, or perhaps what broader networks we might want to collaborate with. As part of that, we also had people from all the different sites that we had represented give small talks about what their sites are like. We find that it's very useful to actually get to ask questions about what makes sense in a place like Niwot, or what makes sense in a place like Cedar Creek, or the Saviera in the desert. Even though we're going to be comparing these data sets to each other, they look very different. And there might be assumptions that people that know the place would think to make that perhaps not all of us are aware of. So having time built into our meetings to really have people present and give us some background of what makes sense for their side, and also to have time for questions for people that perhaps are not as familiar with those different sites was very important, and has really helped us even develop questions. And then the last thing that I want to share is that continuing to work online, at least for the foreseeable future, we have really tried to park downhill. So some of the things that we have tried to keep doing is to really make it as easy as possible and as exciting as possible to collaborate. So some of the things that we have really put effort in is to develop clear author guidelines and have an opt-out method, so that if people spend time doing perhaps something that doesn't end up being part of a publication, they know that they are still included in all of the products that the group develops. We also develop really good project summaries and descriptions, and decided on a leadership person or a leadership group that is pushing each of our 4 groups forward. And then we have monthly check-ins that everyone's invited to join, where we talk about what is it that we've been doing in the time that we've been away, and also to develop new questions or ideas from the progress that we're making. So even though we've not been able to meet in person, I think we're being as productive as we can in this virtual space. And yeah, I'm very excited for all your questions. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Cristy, for this very nice presentation. Also for that more information on how to organize it and what to do. That's really nice and also helpful, I guess. So I guess with this we can start for the questions. Are there any questions? Yeah. So we have one. Have any of you worked on tracking data collection methodologies through collection and synthesis of data from different sites, different networks, etc.? This seems like it could be an important source of error or variance in synthesis projects. Anyone wants to go for that?
I spoke about macro sheds, and we are tracking that a little bit. In macro sheds, it's sort of like a secondary layer. So we sort of made this decision to make it easier to work with. And if you want to dig into the methods, like how was it actually analyzed on what machine and whatnot, you can dig deeper and find it. And then on another synthesis project I worked on with USGS data, I made the same decision to not track methods all the way to the end product, simply because it like complexifies the data in a way that we found made it really hard for people to work with. if they had to make decisions every time about like, do I only want HPCL chlorophyll A or do I want, different versions, there's a smaller subset of users that want that data, and that's available if they want to go to like the second layer of getting our more raw data.
If I may add a comment, well, thank you, David, for this question. I think this is really relevant and important. So tracking methodologies is probably the first point to start when actually doing a synthesis of different data. We are having experience in this cost action Watson about collecting data from isotopic data from different sites. And here, the collection methodology and also analysis really matters, because different analytical methods could actually return different values for the same sample, let's say. So splitting the data sets according also to the methodology of data collection is absolutely essential. So I agree with you, and this is something that we should take care of when doing a synthesis exercise.
Thank you, Daniele. Yeah, I also have some experience with a soil moisture sensor. So you could have even 8 different soil moisture sensors, and then you might end up with relatively different observations, even for the same soil. So that's often very important to know what kind of also measurement device was used for which variable.
I'll follow up with a kind of a question along those same lines, specifically towards gap filling methods and some of the decisions that have been made to approach this challenge. Certain models that we want to use to analyze our data make assumptions about gaps or require no gaps. But your decision on how to fill those gaps, of course, has a set of trade-offs and assumptions. So sharing any insights to how people have managed gaps in these large syntheses, and Cristy too, what you're dealing with experimental data. If there's any unique challenges that you face when trying to synthesize experimental data compared to observational data. But a question for the group.
For us, sometimes the gaps mean something. So a species being gone from the data set, we have to really think critically. Is this part of the method of we just move the clip strip, like where we sample, and that's why we didn't find there, or is the species really gone? So those are really difficult decisions that you really need people from the site to like talk to someone from there to make a good decision about what to do with gaps and whether you should gap fill or not.
I could say, I in my past work, this is sort of I haven't done as global syntheses before, so I'm newer to the gap filling question. So looking forward to hearing other people's approaches. We used, a modeling approach and then some more simple tools to fill our hydrologic data set. But so I would love to hear more from other people on that. But I think one thing we noticed was that the gaps across our time series were certainly consistent and mostly in the winter and, shoulder seasons. And that's when a lot of really interesting ecological stuff happens. And so I think more from an ecological perspective, noticing that it's important for us to fill these gaps as a community so that we can understand as that time period changes what's happening.
I'm also implementing some gap filling methods for our synthesis work. And I think like gap filling methods, it really depends on researchers, like different people will have different methods to do it. So I think probably the most important thing is if you're like doing comparative studies and use data from different watersheds, it's really important to use the same set of like gap filling methods to process all the data. And Second, it's really important to control the quality after you fill the gaps. You do not want to bring like huge errors after you're using the gap filling methods. So I guess that's probably like two important things to keep in mind when applying the gap filling methods.
So one question to follow up on those thoughts is, are you guys doing something similar of a version control like we have in models? We'll release one version and update or provide updates and release another one. Are you thinking about that in terms of data portals as well? Where you say, this is what we changed, or these are the flags for each of this. This is how uncertainty is addressed. Thoughts on that?
Right. So I'm not one of the ones where we have a big data portal yet, but we have been tracking that with our data set, so I think as things have been added or changed or addressed in our overall data set, we've been tracking the versions and what decisions were made sort of between time. So that is something that we have been tracking.
Yeah, and we're doing the same, trying to track versions for code, the portal, and our data sets. And it's one of the reasons we haven't released the data is actually because the ground is always shifting about these key decisions that you're talking about. So gap filling. So can we calculate flux? Okay, this site measures every week, so we can do it in one way. This site measures every 2 months. So how do you make those things talk? We want to use WRTDS like Kathy's using, but we haven't implemented that yet. So we sort of like have held back until we have something we're more confident is sort of the end user cannot think too hard about those things, or at least know that they're all done in the same way. And so we're trying to sort of, we will definitely have versions for the next several years. While I'm talking, I'm just going to jump in and answer Ross's questions on the thing. Well, there's actually 2 macro sheds questions. So yeah, Ross, great question. We actually have explicitly in the grant, we have this macro portal, but we know that other people might want to make different versions of it. And so we're actually going to be hosting a workshop that I'll be sending information out to the CUAHSI network soon, next summer, hopefully in person, fingers crossed, to train people to take our data sets and make their own portals. So we actually have like this grand idea of like having an app to make other apps. So you could like say, I want this figure and that figure here and this and there. And then you could like spit it out for educational purposes is a lot of our target. So you might have like a LTR site in your backyard because you're at the, whatever University of New Hampshire, like Adam, and you want to talk about Hubbard Brook in a specific way. You should probably just use JP Gannon's apps, but you could then just spin one up in your backyard. And then Jingwen asks, the biggest difference with USGS, and I wish I had this figure up, is they are in way larger watersheds. Our watersheds are tiny. So there's a huge difference. CAMEL's big public data sets have completely different watershed sizes. And so if you want to think about hill slope processes or really the direct vegetation control on a lot of the things we're interested in, you're going to see it better in our small, tiny watersheds, many of which don't even appear like an NHD. That's how small the streams are. So it's really a scale is the biggest difference. We actually are going to grab a lot of the USGS data, and we've modeled a lot of our shape of our data after CAMEL's, just so that those 2 data sets can talk to each other. And then I don't have a good answer to Kieran's question, but I like Kieran's question in the in the chat.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. Thanks, Matt, for your answers and then pointing to Kieran's question. So in case people are not seeing that, question is I'm curious about the panelists' thoughts on the value of these major synthesis efforts for generating advances in knowledge rather than the data infrastructure. What are some examples of important scientific discoveries that have arisen from these or other efforts? So a question for the group there. Kieran, thanks for the question.
Thank you for this question, Sharon. This is a tricky one, actually. I don't want to be trivial, but I think that, of course, you can understand, for instance, the role of different climates on something that or some processes that you could not observe by just taking taking data and doing observations based on one single catchment or just a small series of catchments. Or on the other hand, you could simply put together a series of data that you wouldn't be able to put in your own research. It's like when you do meta-analysis, maybe, no? You just increase your data set and you just are able to span over different climates and try to understand if there are similar or different processes that actually produce the same response, irrespective of climate, or if the data sample, the sample size actually can matter and can impact on the on your results. And so increasing the opportunities to have data from multiple sites is probably actually a way to increase and to produce advances in knowledge, which is actually what we should seek as a scientist. I'm not sure I gave a very meaningful answers because this is a tricky question, but I think there are valuable things in these efforts.
I was just going to say, well, I agree. I guess that was our hope from doing a synthesis effort, was to gain new knowledge. And for in our case, especially, silica is not a subject that a lot of people study. And so, some of our understanding of its dynamics come from a few studies or a few locations. So being able to consolidate all these data from different programs that have been collecting it over a really long period of time, but have not necessarily synthesized the information, allows us to test different hypotheses about how it functions in watersheds and, different, the magnitude of seasonality or sort of its concentration discharge relationship, those kinds of things that just haven't really been investigated before.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the greatest things about synthesis is having the opportunity to facilitate different people just being in the same space and thinking together. I think it allows us to ask questions and generate knowledge that we would be less likely to produce if we were each alone in our own spaces and our own assumptions. So I think it's really valuable to get to think together with other people that you wouldn't normally work with.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for those answers. And then I want to kind of pick up just as we're wrapping up here on this idea, Cristy, that you actually talked about during your presentation is collaboration in this space. And for the last year and a half, we've been working in our tiny boxes right now, and the impact that has, especially on early career researchers who are missing out on those opportunities to network and talk and meet people, and maybe some ways that people have found to overcome that. And I think there's a void that where a lot of us are experiencing. That's really important for professional development, and just wondering how people have leveraged synthesis type activities to kind of fill that void for the development of early career professionals.
I think I've lagged, like most people probably in the pandemic, with the online participation, but something I loved at the beginning of the pandemic was people just like made up conferences in the middle of them. And so like Michael Meyer and Jake Zwart put on like a sort of like aquatic data science conference for a day, and it was like 80 people. And what I found is I can actually focus on that for that amount of time and actually build community for one day. I found the digital conferences that go on for multiple days a little harder to like cut yourself out of your normal work life. It sort of feels like you still have to work and go to the conference. So I found that really, I've had some new networks and new collaborations just from those like shorter, there were two of them. There was another machine learning one that was a single day for hydrology that those were really valuable. I liked these like targeted, like the community's already doing something around this. So something like this is really also, I think, a really nice thing that's short and targeted. And, you know, I will leave this wanting to contact Kathi and Liang because there's textures here that are similar, and we have some questions about silica for macrosheds, and I want to sort of follow up. So I like these smaller, shorter ones feel more feasible to me.
I would agree with that. I haven't done a great job at attending virtual conferences for much of the time outside my own talk, which is not not useful. But I guess like Cristy, we've had all of our synthesis has been virtual. You know, we were funded in February 2020, and so the entirety of our synthesis project was virtual, which is not what we were expecting. So it's definitely been pivoting in terms of how to facilitate collaboration and people getting to know each other. We have never met a lot of people. I know Adam, which has been wonderful, but you know, so I think learning ways to make the best of a virtual space, you know, through regular meetings or work days that you're just hanging out on Zoom together, those kind of things. So I think, yeah, forcing you to be creative and build your network in different ways, and recognizing that everybody is doing the same thing. There's not some like in-person conference going on that you're missing out on. So I think I had a little bit of FOMO before, but you know, we're all dealing with the same thing.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a great session. Thank you to all the speakers for participating in a series of great talks and a really enjoyable Q&A session afterwards. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, everyone, for out there that we can't see, all the attendees for being here. And please join us again next week, same day, same time, for our next webinar. Bhavna, do you have any closing?
No, you captured it very well. Thank you for an engaging seminar. This was really great. Our next one is on data harmonization and integration. So maybe we'll have some follow-on attendees there. But thank you for this awesome webinar. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.